This is Bonjour Chai, the Hot and Chanshi edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovy in Toronto. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we are all about some good Israeli lovin'. Is this a hot Sabra winter or something else? We get to talk to Aleeza Chanowitz about her new show, Chanshi, and so much more. Stay tuned. We got a great one for you today. Phoebe, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm thinking about Leonardo DiCaprio,
of
as
course.
are all women at all times. I was, it caught my eye that there was another round of Leonardo DiCaprio headline circulation. And this one has made its way all the way to the Jewish news because, and not just the Canadian Jewish news, the Jewish news is worldwide because, Leonardo DiCaprio's latest rumored love interest is an Israeli woman. And you will never guess, she's 56 years old. No, she's 19 years old. And she is in the profession of fashion modeling. And her name is Eden Polani. And she is, a very pretty model. And whether or not he's actually dating her, I do not know. He has not confided in me either way.
So, I mean, he is the one that's 56, right? Is that correct? Or how old is he?
Nobody's 56. Well, I mean, somebody in this world is surely 56, but he's 48 apparently. I had to look it up for this. This
makes me feel a lot better.
Which,
right? I'm roughly in that world of Leonardo DiCaprio, at least age-wise, if not anything else. Why is this interesting? Or is it interesting because it shouldn't be?
I mean, I should confess that the article I wrote for the Canadian Jewish News about this, I wrote with a sleeping 17-month-old, not 19-year-old, 17-month-old on me, because it may have been a bit of a hot take. However, I do think it is actually significant. And here's why. It used to be that these sorts of stories would make the news because oh, look, it's representation of a Jewish woman. Oh, wow, let's make sure like when it was Bar Raffaele that he was dating at one point. But here, I noticed that there was a story in the Jewish Chronicle, so from Britain, that was basically this aggregation of tweets about how problematic age gap relationships are. And I thought, wow, coverage of this sort of thing has really changed. And that there's this whole sort of post-Me Too really focus on, is it okay for an older man to be with a younger woman, especially if the older man is, rich and powerful? And that was how people were talking about this, rather than just oh, look, there's a beautiful Jewish woman. Let's share
So do you
a
think
picture.
so just to clarify then, do you think that the same discussions would be happening regardless of this girl's nationality? Yes, she's a girl. She's 19. No, she's a woman.
I think that I don't think that there'd be any reason Jewish outlets would be covering it if the woman were not Jewish, because to my knowledge, Leonardo DiCaprio is not Jewish. But yeah, that's basically what I think, is that the reason it's being covered in the way it is. So it's not only Jewish outlets interested in this. This has been a real sort of trending topic, in the gossipy world of, sort of what used to be gossip journalism, but that in recent years has morphed into this kind of very concerned, sort of secular ethical journalism, where instead of gushing over celebrities, it's kind of asking if they're being problematic. And Leonardo DiCaprio has done a problematicness, apparently, because he dates a lot of younger women. So people are chastising him about it. Now, whether they should be or not is a separate question that we can discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I get the question about the problematics. I find it interesting that the Jewishness is sort of being set aside. Even within the Jewish community, other than the fact that it's being covered because she is Jewish. I can't help but, question of oh, wait, is this anti-Semitic, right? That the more important thing that is being discussed is actually the more important thing to discuss, right? And whether or not she's a wonderful example of the Jewish community, great. There's more Jews in the world that are doing amazing things. We don't talk about that at all. All that we care about is whether this is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought was interesting, though, really was this, I guess it isn't so much the Jewish angle, but is more, because I think, especially in this context, we're talking about Leonardo DiCaprio dating very young women for fairly brief amounts of time, and then they age out of his age range. There are graphs showing this.
This is a whole subculture
and
that
then
I am not aware of.
or, well, it's just sort of, I don't know. You don't want to be aware of it. But the point is, I don't think that there's a real continuity question here. You know what I mean? I don't think there's any. If Leonardo DiCaprio is rumored to be dating a new model, I don't think the idea is like, oh, he's going to be marrying this person and having children with this person. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that it's going to be a topic in that way.
I get it. Yeah, the age thing doesn't bother me in as many ways, because at some point, I mean, it might be icky and we might feel that it's icky, but at some point, it's hard for me to judge. Do we judge older women who go out with much younger men? I know that Leonardo DiCaprio, because he is globally famous, is in a position of power. In the past, from what I gather, the types of women that he's dated were not necessarily coerced because they were equally stars or stars in the making. So I don't see that there. And at some point, we sort of have to create that idea that, like, if you're a certain age, you know what you're doing and you're able to make a decision for yourself.
Yeah, so I agree with you, but I'm starting to think that this may be a generational thing and that Gen Z understands things very differently because, yes, I, came of age in the world where once you're an adult, you make decisions for yourself. They're not necessarily good decisions. People aren't necessarily nice to you. It's not that the world becomes suddenly this well-organized place the minute you're an adult legally, but you don't want to talk about age gap relationships in this way that unfortunately has happened a bunch since Me Too, where you have stories about like this innocent young
ingenue
28-year-old, this ingenue 28-year-old who didn't even know what was what. It's like at a certain point, people are adults, and that doesn't mean that nothing terrible or even illegal can happen to them. They can still be the victims of, crimes. It's just, it's not inherently unethical, for two adults of different ages to date, or else really people are always of different ages from each other.
You remember that
it would be pretty tricky.
When
otherwise.
You were in school, was there that old line about how, like, to know the age gap that is acceptable, you're supposed to go half your age plus 7 years? And then you would always work that through. It's like 20 becomes 17. Okay, maybe sort of I get. And then 80 becomes 47. And like, okay, that's sort of something there, maybe. But I feel like that's not true anymore, both for good and for bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, some parts of society have kind of drilled down on that. And I've seen things even where women in their 30s, if they're enough younger than a man, it's like, she's the innocent young thing. And then I'm sort of, my jaw drops because like, no. But I think what's been helpful with Me Too and where I think it's been so I'm talking about like the 2017 shift inspired by all the terrible things done by Harvey Weinstein, where people now sort of look at relationships and, in a new light, in a new sort of critical light, especially heterosexual relationships. And I think it's good that people take into account power dynamics when you're talking about like a boss and an employee, a professor and an adult but still student, things like that. And that there are certain situations where even if two people are adults, it's not ethical for them to, form a relationship. I think that's, fair and reasonable. I think where things get sort of, where I think the younger generation may, want to reconsider is this idea that there's something inherently exploitative about, power imbalance relationships, because all relationships are power imbalance relationships, and often in different ways, with one person more powerful in one way, the other in another way. But the other thing this is making me think of is this idea of who it should be ethically out of bounds for dating. And I think, you get into something tricky when like, there's always this thing about like students and teachers, right? And I don't mean like children, I mean like adults in like a university setting. But then I think about something like New York University, where I went to grad school, is like half of New York City is somehow involved with it. If you're a grad student at NYU, which I was, you are both teacher, because you're TAing, and a student. Are you not ethically allowed to date anybody who is an NYU either student or professor, or indeed another grad student, because, You know what I'm saying? Like, you can get to a point where it doesn't all quite add up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion. I think it's beyond what we're thinking about here. If the professor's in a different department, if the professor or somebody is an administrator, but they really have nothing to do with you. If you're an undergrad, I think it makes things way more tricky. I don't think that an undergrad is in a position to date anybody who might be in a position of power. But let's I don't know. It does get messy, and I think that we should save that and think about that. What does interest me about this story is how everybody just assumes, he's never going to get married to this person, so that it's okay, right? And I'm like, well, what if he does? What if Leo DiCaprio I'm talking about, and what's her name again? Polani?
Eden
Polani, not Polanski. Yes. Different type of relationship. But Eden Polani is... I'm gaming it out. I'm like, what's going to happen? There's going to be all these discussions about whether he's going to convert. Is this going to become another celebrity conversion like Jared and Ivanka? Is it where does that go? And I'm like, just because it's new or it's not even a thing, maybe this is the person that convinces Leonardo DiCaprio to settle down.
Sure. But the other thing that I'm thinking about, though, and that I want to ask you about, because you would be far more knowledgeable about this than I am, is it more common for women who are not Jewish to convert to Judaism when, in the process of marrying a man who is Jewish than for non-Jewish men to convert when marrying a Jewish woman? And I ask both, so two reasons. One is the sort of, the matrilineal...
for sure. Yeah.
Issue, of course, but the other is just this sort of cultural, there's a real cultural interest in Jewish men and non-Jewish women and the so-called shiksa and all of this. And I feel like there is not an equivalent cultural interest in the broader culture, of what's happening when a non-Jewish man is with a Jewish woman. I feel like that it happens all the time. It happens, from what I've looked into, about the same amount. It's just people don't seem to care. Okay. Both for these matrilineal reasons and for just cultural reasons, because, Philip Roth and Woody Allen had nothing to say on the matter.
So, and that's where everybody knows anything about Judaism in 20th century America. First of all, much ink has been spilled over the question of the shiksa and shiksa peel and any discussion that much blood has been spilled, I'm sure, over that question. I'm sure there are people that say that I shouldn't even say that word and it's offensive just to even bring up the word shiksa.
You should say the S word, and people will think you're talking about something totally different.
There are people that genuinely believe that. So let's not go there. I will...
The S slur. The S slur.
I don't have the data in front of me, and I'm not such a data head. I know that I should be more. But anecdotally, what I would say is it used to be not so much of a difference, right? It used to be that it was fairly 50-50, that you would have non-Jewish men equally willing and part of the process of converting when two people are...
right. And there's the other issue that is perhaps not family. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. It takes more for a man to convert to Judaism.
It does take a little more of
himself.
And so anecdotally, I do think that it was fairly equal. Anecdotally, I could be entirely wrong here. I do get the sense that lately it has started shifting, in that if it's the woman in the relationship that is not Jewish, there seems to be a greater impetus for this person to convert, rather than if it's the man. It's like, well, we at least know that even in the Orthodox community, this kid will get an aliyah and whatnot, and that's not as thought about, although it is definitely still a concern, especially because people have a relationship with their rabbi sometimes, and they say, hey, I'd like you to do the wedding, and sometimes the rabbi can't because of this, and so there is still some pressure to convert, but not as much. So Leo, let's hope you're circumcised. If it gets to that, I don't know. Speaking of hot young Israelis, why don't we get to our main interview with Aleeza Chanowitz of Chanshi right after we hear from our sponsor.
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? At Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
A few weeks ago, I mentioned during my nachas that there was a new show premiering at Sundance called Chanshi. You may also recall that Chanshi's writer and star is my wife's cousin, and today we dive deeper into this show and what it represents. The show is about a young woman who makes aliyah for all the wrong reasons and everything that ensues. It is funny, poignant, and more than a little sexy. Chanshi travels to Israel for her best friend's wedding and uses the opportunity to fulfill her fantasy of wanting to sleep with as many hot Israeli soldiers as possible. Of course, nothing is as simple as it seems, and Chanshi begins to learn a lot about the country, other people, and herself. All this sprung from the brain of Aleeza Chanowitz, and Aleeza is here with us from Tel Aviv. Aleeza, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Hey, you said my name right.
Oh, come on. It's this family.
Exactly.
Hi. So I love this show. Chanshi is fantastic. And I wanted to just start with the opening scene, and just sort of talk about how, first you think you're seeing this kind of this girl's romantic fantasy about an Israeli soldier. And then there's this moment where she kisses all of these different soldiers on the mouth. And it's like, no, this is going to be different. This isn't just a sort of very chaste romantic fantasy about a soldier, but this is sexual in a different sort of way, right? And I found that both sort of very clever, but also just extremely funny. There was just something very funny about it. I was really laughing. But I was just thinking about what to make of that. So it almost there's something about this where it seems like coming from a very religious environment maybe makes Chanshi sort of unaware of the secular sort of norms of where a woman would be kind of more passive and not really going around out and pursuing men. I almost wonder if the absence of kind of socialization in the secular world is kind of what almost allows Chanshi to kind of have that approach.
First of all, in terms of writing, I can't, you go through all these different drafts of what in the end is actually going to be filmed and then what actually remains from the editing room. And that scene through all the drafts always remained the opening scene. Because I thought it was really telling and surprising, and it kind of puts you into this world. Maybe at first you think you're seeing this kind of is old Israeli film, and then you're wait a second, something here is wrong, and then she kind of wakes up and you're oh, this is a fantasy. But people ask me, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but people a lot of times ask me about this whole thing, about this obsession with American girls obsessing over Israeli soldiers. And there is some kind of explanation of this being the other and kind of the ideal Israeli and how we fantasize about these things. So I don't really have the explanation. I just have the feeling that I have it, and a lot of other people I know have fantasized about it. And then you get to know them and you're oh, they take off their uniform, and then it's just not as interesting.
Well, it depends if they take off their uniform and there's nothing under it, and they're just wearing normal clothes. It depends what you mean by take off their uniform. But yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely a thing. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. I'm not sure whether it's limited to North American Jews or just I feel like there's the hot Israeli soldier is almost a thing in mainstream society. At
least in the Jewish world, wherever it is, because I think, Avi, you don't agree?
No, I actually do. So I don't know. I don't think about hot Israeli soldiers myself personally, male or female.
It takes all kinds. It takes all kinds.
The way that I approached that, or the way I was thinking about it, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, first of all, you went to Yeshiva Flatbush, right? I believe that's correct. Which Phoebe, by the way, has a connection to because her grandmother grew up around the corner, and we figured this out.
My grandmother actually grew up in Montreal, but spent many of her later years on that block. Yes,
East 15th. Anyways, so the modern Orthodox and Zioni, like modern Zionist approach of like Zionist education in high school is about like rah-rah Zionism, rah-rah Israel. We love Israel. We love the soldiers that are protecting us. And I see it as a natural extension that like, of course you're going to like develop like a thing for hot chayalim, hot soldiers, right? And that the story begins because all of a sudden you have this woman who has, this young woman who has this moment and this opportunity to say, no, you know what? I'm actually going to go for it, right? I have this thing for young, hot Israeli soldiers that I want to fulfill. I'm going to move a month early, right? I'm going to go a month early to my friend's wedding so that I can go and do this. And she all of a sudden recognizes that, yes, it's available and it's possible for her to do this, but it's complicated. And the entire theme of the rest of the show, right, is about said complication. It's about how not easy it is to deal with the reality that you learn and what ends up being there. So the other example is, sexuality in general. Forget about her wanting to have sex with hot young Israeli soldiers. It's sex is complicated. And she didn't learn that in her Jewish day school upbringing, right? She just learned about sex, and you're going to do it when you're married and you'll figure it out then. But sex is complicated, and consent around sex is complicated, and the negotiations during sex, right, and playing with that is complicated. And Israel is complicated, even though when you're learning about Israel in your day school environment, you learn about Zionism, and nobody tells you that Zionism, the apotheosis of Zionism, is paperwork and complicated paperwork and annoying paperwork. And so all of what she is doing is going through all of these steps to realize that life isn't what you learned in high school, and that stuff is complicated to the nth degree. That was my approach. Help me out here.
That does make sense to me. I will say also that when you get to the end of the series, I think you look back and you see things a bit differently of Chanshi's character, and also in terms of where she started and where she ended up. Character building. For sure.
That's what you're supposed to do, I heard, in like filmmaking, right?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. No, also because like I'm thinking, I mean, maybe I didn't it wasn't at the front of my brain, but it's definitely like something that about me that I put into my character is like when I came to Israel, and like I knew a bunch of these old Israeli songs, and all these Israelis were like, where do you know? And I'm like, we sang it in our choir. Do you know what I mean? Like you get a certain, it's part of your upbringing, my upbringing in terms of Yeshiva option, like what it, Zionism.
Can we talk a little bit about your background? Because I was just, while watching it, I was thinking like, these accents are accents I know. These people are people I kind of know, but I went to Stuyvesant High School in New York, kind of had a different, I grew up in Manhattan. I'm Jewish, obviously. Surprise. I know this is going to shatter everybody's thoughts here, but I did not grow up religious at all. So I'm just trying to make sense of sort of, like who's who on the show, but also just like, so you grew up in Brooklyn and moved to Israel, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn. I moved to Israel when I was 21.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are divorced. My father's Chabad always was. Definitely got more into his roots later on. And my mom is modern Orthodox. So I kind of come from a mix. And I think in terms of building the character of me kind of coming from this mishmash, which doesn't seem maybe like a mishmash to someone on the outside who's just like religious Jew or not, Mm-hmm. And for me personally, being on the fence about everything, no matter which way, like Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox kind of thing. And I wanted to put that kind of into my character. Because I don't feel like I come with some, like, this is... If you try to put her into a box, which is very convenient because then you can understand things, and I'm not against putting people into boxes to explain things, mm-hmm. but if you try to put into her like a religious box of what she is, I don't think I've been like on the nose specifically she's Chabad or she's this or she's that. She's definitely more religious than the way I grew up, just because that's better storytelling. It's like easier to...
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, I think that makes sense. And I think that also just speaking about like how it would seem from the outside, I don't think it would be self-evident to somebody from the outside that an observant Jew looking to kind of break free would run off to the Jewish state to do that. You know what I mean? Like that's something that wouldn't necessarily seem like an obvious choice.
It would if you're
why
into
not
hot
just go to some other
soldiers.
Sure, but there are hot young men in Brooklyn too, right? And who are available and so forth. It makes perfect sense in the context of the show, but like that it would seem maybe like a unusual choice, perhaps from the outside, if you're thinking of somebody who finds their observant Jewish background stifling in some way, that they would run off to Israel and indeed perhaps to the arms of observant Jewish men.
Well, the thing about moving countries, if you're trying to get away from something as a Jew, you know, it's a place you definitely can go to, and it's pretty far from Brooklyn.
Yes.
And so I think that it's like, it's easy to go, you know, you just need to be Jewish, and kind of like, you could even be a criminal and they'll accept, you know, you have somewhere to go. So I can understand why on paper it's like, if you're running away from kind of your bubble, why would you go to another Jewish bubble? But there's something about it that, for me, I can only speak for myself, was very freeing, because it's like, okay, everybody kind of knows where I'm coming from. I want to be, at the end of the day, I want to marry a Jewish guy, but I kind of like want to do things my way. And it was a place where like you can go. And for me, I felt like it's very freeing. I could do whatever I want. And if I want to keep Shabbos, everybody knows what Shabbos is, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that would be then more difficult to do just by like changing neighborhoods in Brooklyn, right?
Right.
Oh, that makes sense.
I'm just as fascinated, I have to say, by some of the secondary characters. And I think that not only they're just like well written and thought out, but I think that they're, to me, the highlights of where everything, the story shows that it's really developed, and showing how, you know, some person is X, some person is Y, and that they are the people that you actually meet, and that have a hard, you know, time, you know, going through the life just as much as the other person does, but in their own way. And I end up thinking just as much about, you know, what's going on through the mind of David's roommates, who seem just as interesting, and they're like giving him a hard time, but they're going through their own struggles. Chanshi's new roommate, to me, is like one of the most fascinating characters that there were, because she wants to step into this world. She wants to do other stuff, but there's something that's holding her back. And she clearly had a very similar education, but it was for some reason like more ingrained in her. And she had less desire, or she has more desire but less ability internally to go and do that. And we meet these characters all the time. We meet people that are, you know, more than us and less than us, and that there's this spectrum of people that are doing more and doing less, and feeling more and feeling less, across all the characters that are there. And they're not just there to serve the story of Chanshi itself.
Well, I think well, thank you. That's a great, that's a big compliment, because I think writing it, it's like I wanted to tell a certain story of Chanshi, and then you also want other characters to be interesting. And kind of like different episodes, I would say, okay, now write it from the perspective of this character. So if that worked out and made them interesting, that's great. Also, in terms of casting, I think we did a really good job, because first of all, the casting director, Hila Yuval, and the directors, Aaron Geva and Mickey Trias, like, we're all interested in the other smaller characters in terms of casting. Like, it's important. It doesn't just fill up the frame, you know? So, yeah.
I kept going back and forth while watching, between thinking like that this is showing how different the religious world is from the secular world, and then also thinking how it's everything, all people are basically the same, being that age is the same no matter who you are, having the sort of good enough boyfriend but being curious about what else is out there is like an extremely that age sort of mood to be in, that, you know, I think a lot of young women could relate to, whether, you know, there wouldn't be a banquet hall being booked or anything, but the sort of the guy you're sort of supposed to, you know, maybe cohabit with for a while, then eventually marry, and everybody wants that, but like you feel like what else is out there. I think that certainly is something that like every young woman I know in the secular world kind of went through at some point. But then I just keep thinking then that what was different, like I can't imagine, especially in the kind of post-Me Too era, like a secular show showing a woman kind of like young woman out sort of chasing men with like that fearlessness, you know? Like, again, I only saw the first 2 episodes, so I'm sure maybe the fear comes later, but like that just seems something that you just wouldn't really see. I don't mean to say that all religious women are out doing that. I don't think that was
no, but
particularly
I think the lesson is
but more
that
just that like if you haven't had that,
imagine.
Well, sure, but also that there isn't the kind of like in the secular culture, there is just much more of like what, like both the dangers of women doing that and that it would be kind of like unbecoming to do that. So yeah, I thought it was, that's where I kept just going back and forth. But also just thinking, that sort of that world that's also kind of between North America and Israel. I feel like this just felt very fresh, like unlike anything else I've ever seen, basically. Yeah.
Thanks. I will say I do think I offend a lot of people, but I try to offend everyone. So then it's like even playing ground.
You should hear the episode we did on Chabad. We have offended apparently a lot of people because of last week's episode.
All right. Well, there's no such thing as bad publicity. I mean, people also like I know that I saw. Well, I'm only on two things. One is I have to say that the audiences at Sundance, who maybe some of them are Jewish. I didn't see really any religious people there, so it seemed like it was very secular Americans, and they had a great response and they really liked the show. So I guess her behavior is something that people identify with, and I think getting away with certain things by doing a show in Israel makes it possible because we haven't reached the point where America's at yet in terms of what you can put on TV and how you're going to phrase it and how you're not going to offend anyone. So,
well, right. And there's also the very like literal sort of the kind of cultural turn in criticism, at least in the States, towards taking things very literally. And what I found really refreshing in Chanshi is that there isn't nothing feels like you have to take it literally. Like it's clearly based. It all feels very true, but not
not a
you don't
documentary.
have to. You don't exactly like. You don't have to think. Would it really be wise to kiss on the mouth that many Israeli soldiers in one? You don't have to think about it like that. And I just love how the opening really sets up that like you're not to be taking this literally in that way.
But I did do that, and we had to do a few takes. So
so it did happen. It did happen.
Takes, just in case.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I don't think we got that last one. Can we do it again?
I'm sure you're anticipating.
Well, what a terrible job you must have. It sounds awful, Well, why did I go into opinion journalism anyway.
I'm sure you're already anticipating that there's going to be a backlash from within the Orthodox community that is not going to be the same response that you may have gotten from the Sundance audiences. Is there something that you would preemptively say to an audience that is going to be Orthodox and watching this and saying this is a horrible representation and of our community, this is wrong, this is a quote unquote chilul Hashem, right, a desecration of God's name? Like, how have you been thinking about the reception of this in the community that it's nominally based in?
I haven't been thinking about that.
Now
and I will
are.
say that, but I'll tell you, if I leave the house, right, because I have a 6-week-old baby. So if and when I leave the house, I've been getting good response from people on the street. I recently went to Jerusalem for a dental appointment, and 3 religious people asked me for selfies. They said that they loved the show.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah, so I can't say it's like a religious people. I think it's maybe more, it's not necessarily a Jewish thing, but just people that are more conservative in their lifestyle and think that this is the only way to go about things. Those are the people who are going to have a problem with it. And I say to them, like, who told you to watch the show?
Yeah, I was going to say, are they even watching? That's something I would ask you also, Avi. Do you think that people who are so...
Yes, they're watching.
I was going to say, I think the Orthodox community has this thing where they hate watch or hate read anything that has to do with the Orthodox community, even if it's going to be evil, just so that they can deconstruct it and take it apart and say, that's wrong, and that's wrong, and that's not fair, and that's wrong, and that's bad, and that makes us look bad, and that's that.
I think it actually makes us look good if somebody would be open to hearing it. I think that someone who's saying, like, the religious lifestyle is good and perfect and no one needs to, like, air your dirty laundry, I could say, well, it didn't work for me. All I'm doing here is telling my own personal story and I'm trying to pay the rent. That's really what it is. But
one of the remarkable things about this story, if you want to respond, I think about the fact that, like, she doesn't walk away from her orthodoxy. She doesn't walk away from her faith and her practice and her traditions. She basically says, no, I want to be doing this, but I also want to be doing those people, right? And that I don't see it as a conflict, because I do love my Judaism, and there's a positive message there.
That's what I'm saying in terms of on the fence. So I think that actually it sends a good message to people about in terms of, I love Judaism and I love religious Judaism. I just couldn't find myself in certain rules. And in terms of also, Israel, I think it makes Israel look like a fun place that has, different sides instead of it's either, kibush or it's like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I think you're 100% right. Israelis sort of get that just because there's one thing that you do that isn't in line with the whole of Dati world doesn't mean that you reject it all, and that everybody has their thing, and that's different. And everybody,
I don't think Israelis all get that. From what I've heard from people who told, like I'm on Facebook, but besides I don't have any other social media. So people have sent me like screenshots of like the bad things, the bad comments that people are saying, because I find it entertaining and I find it interesting that it seems like these are people who either didn't watch the show or can't wait to watch the show, and therefore they have to say something negative about it. And they're not necessarily religious. They're just like conservative people in terms of like, oh, we shouldn't have sex on TV. And it seems also like for Israeli audiences,
especially nowadays with these flat screens, it's so hard to have sex on TV.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, no, now I lost my train of thought, but it was worth it.
Well, if you get back to it, let us know. I wonder, before we can go, I really want to spend a minute or two if you can comment on the music, because I thought that this was one of the few shows in recent memory, Jewish or not, that had a soundtrack that was both great and also very appropriate to each situation, and was so spot on to all the songs that were being selected, and how they were being used.
So I will. So I'm glad you said that,
I think you should absolutely be making a playlist of this, either on Spotify or somewhere else, to like Apple Music. Make a playlist, because
my producers will only pay for 2 of the songs, but almost all of the music is original music. Besides for some of the songs that play in like the background of like the shawarma and stuff, and some of those are also his. It's all his name is Shuzin, and he's this really amazing musician, and he also works with references, and he never heard, like, for example, the second song that plays is sounds to me like the reference was Miami Boys Choir. And here's someone who never heard of Miami Boys Choir, and he just is really good at imitating, I guess, mm-hmm. What's the
homage
word? Or whatever it is, but he just he's not religious, you know what I mean? But he's just so talented, and he would I'd say, I want something kind of like this, and he did it. And for example, episode 4, you didn't watch,
I watched
but
most of them
I said,
I'm on episode.
Oh, okay. So
hooray for
example,
illegal streaming services.
Yes, yeah. As long as people are watching, right? That he we said, I said something like Wild West. Do you know what I mean? But on a settlement, and he did this he just pulled this out of his ass, and because he's just really good. Shoes in, everybody. Okay,
we have to check this out. We have to make it, and yes,
check it out. Send him a message. I'll tell him you also said that you liked it. I want to hear it
all. Because this is the personal thing. The one recollection that I have of you through the years is that in my CD collection, there was always this mixtape from Aleeza's bat mitzvah with a face of her saying, "Don't bug me." And it has literally been in our lives for 20 years and close to it. And so you're a mixtape person. You should be putting out all the music from the show.
Yes. There's 2 Harry Belafonte songs on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was that kid.
Aleeza, I hope that there are, I know that you're not necessarily thinking about seasons 2s or 3s, but there definitely is work here available in all of the spin-off shows with all the other characters. Keep doing amazing work, and hopefully we'll have you on again. And you should set a show in Montreal about absolutely 100%.
And film it in winter. Film it in winter.
Right. Underground. Right. That's my next project.
Done. Aleeza Chanowitz, the star and creator of Chanshi. Thank you for coming on Bonjour Chai. You can check it out, hopefully, somewhere soon in North America.
On an
illegal streaming site, which I will not mention, but you should wait for it to be picked up by Netflix, because I'm sure it will be. And if you've seen it, we'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts. Send us email at bonjour@thecjn.ca. Let us know what you think about Chanshi. And now it's time in the show for our nachas of the week. Phoebe, what's your nachas this week?
Well, Avi, my nachas is OHIP, Ontario's version of Canadian health insurance, because that is what I have been patronizing quite a bit lately, as my younger daughter and I have had matching ear infections. Woohoo. So I just keep thinking about, we decided to get them to match. But what I just keep thinking about whenever I'm going to the doctor, but especially with my children, is I think about what a hassle, this would be in the States where I'm from, where every time you're not only, there isn't the usual sort of, it's frustrating and upsetting when a child's feeling sick, even if it's nothing serious. But then there's also the co-pays, all of this. And I think about just what an easy thing it is here. You just show up, you go to the doctor, you show the health card or a photo of the health card, if that's what you have, since they give you only one, and they're, with two parents, you only get the one health card. And you just go to the doctor, right? And that's it. And I just feel extremely grateful this week for Canadian healthcare and for just how easy it is. Like, not even about the sort of, also, obviously, there are other issues for why I like Canadian healthcare, but just the ease. And I think that's something people don't always realize about it. And I'm happy with that. So I praise it, and I hope everybody gets themselves some good Canadian healthcare.
Beautiful. Yes. Good Canadian healthcare. I remember when I was living in the States, they would, you'd go to Starbucks and it's like, is there anything else I can give you? And I'd be like, universal healthcare. And they would roll their eyes and sigh and be like, oh, okay. Yeah. My nachas this week is that this weekend, most specifically Thursday, February 9th, marks the 100th birthday of Chava Rosenfarb, who is a survivor, a Jewish-Canadian author of Yiddish poetry, Yiddish novels. She was probably one of the greatest contributors to post-Holocaust Yiddish fiction, one of definitely. And so this weekend marks the 100th year of her birth, and 2023 being the centenary year of her birth. She is being feted by her hometown of Lodz, Poland, as having the year of Chava Rosenfarb. There will be an academic conference devoted to her work and her life in October. I think it's really fascinating that somebody who then eventually settled and made her life in Canada post-war and did much of her greatest work in Montreal, in Canada, is being celebrated in such a way. So a größer yasher koyach to the work of to Chava Rosenfarb and the work that she did, and to the city of Lodz for celebrating her in this manner. Our hats are off to you. Phoebe, thanks as always. Lots of fun today.
Thanks, Avi. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending February 11th, Shabbat Parashat Yitro. The show is produced and edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcasts is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is always one of the best ways we get new listeners. As always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. I'm Avi Feingold.
And I'm Phoebe Maltz-Bovey.